Oh, right. We are live on YouTube. So I'll send you the link via Facebook, and then you send it to other people. I'm so sorry we have to do that. It's
Oh, it's
just
all right.
this
These
this
things happen.
not working as anticipated. That's for sure. But hey, here we are on YouTube live. I'm gonna mute this not working as anticipated. That's for sure. Let me just mute us on YouTube, but I'm gonna leave it open here so I can see the comments as well.
Excellent.
I'm sending you the link right now on Facebook. And,
Okay.
you can watch it over. You can send it to other people. This is lagging my computer, so this might take a while. But it's good. We're stalling. That's what we're supposed to do. So it's not bad. Yeah, man. Actually, I'm gonna send you the link here. Why am I going to YouTube?
Okay.
I can just say do that. That's better. And also, yeah, someone wanted to sing this Robin Hood theme. I think that's a marvelous idea.
Yeah. So if I send out that link you've just sent me, yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna post it here as well, so more people learn about that. Yeah. And then we should be.
I just sent out the new link then. So I think Alex is asking if they should head over to YouTube or stay.
Oh, they could stay. I mean, they are here already, but please stay and do ask questions in the end. It will be better. Here you can ask your questions with audio, and on YouTube I have to read them. Oh, okay. Yeah, we have a YouTube comments, and yeah, I think everything is set. So it's up to you. When we are ready to start, let me know, and I will just do like a brief introduction.
I'm ready whenever you are, honestly. So.
Ok. Uma breve introdução em português aqui para a audiência brasileira. Nós temos aqui hoje o professor Stephen Basdeo, que vai apresentar sobre Harold ou o Castelo de Morford, de Robert Southey. O primeiro romance de Robin Hood. E nós vamos ouvir a fala do professor e depois abrir para perguntas e respostas que podem ser feitas pelo chat do YouTube, pelos comentários do YouTube. So, we have here with us Dr. Stephen Basdeo from the American International University in London, and he will be talking to us about Robert Southey's Harold, or The Castle of Morford, the first Robin Hood novel. And we will now hear about his paper, and then we will open for Q&A after that. So everyone who has a question, type in the YouTube comment, or if you are on the call, type in the chat, I have a question, and then I will give you the word. That being said, well, it's with you now, Stephen.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So I think the easiest thing for me to do will be to share my screen with you. So hopefully this goes off all swimmingly. Brilliant. All right, so hopefully you can all see what I see now, a PowerPoint with a picture of Robert Southey's.
Just a minute, I will fix that. Yep, that's good now.
Excellent. So you can all see a picture of the 18th century manuscript online. That's brilliant. So yeah, Robert Southey's Harold, or the Castle of Morford, written in 1791, and me and my fellow editor, Mark Truesdale, and I'm going to introduce him, who is also my very good friend, I should add as well, and co-editor. We've given it the appellation, or the designation, I should say, of the first Robin Hood novel. So it's actually currently locked away in the Bodleian. And today I'm just going to talk about, give people a bit of an overview of the plot, what goes on in Harold, and also some of the potential sources and influences at work in Southey's manuscript. But first, it does, as I say, he's one of my really good friends and my co-editor, Mark Truesdale, author of a brilliant monograph as well, from back in, that should be 2018, called The King and Commoner Tradition. And I do want to stress that some of the ideas in this talk are the result of our collaboration. And so think of me as a spokesperson for the project instead of presenting kind of solely my own ideas. And I think we've collaborated so long on this now that I'm not really sure what was my idea and what was Mark's anymore. So, but no, you know, this is very much the eventual publication of Harold is a collaboration between both of us. I mean, I do just want to talk a little bit about the general context before I get into Southey's text of Robin Hood in 18th century literature. Now, on the one hand, you had collections of songs which circulated primarily in small, usually 4-pence books called Robin Hood's Garland. Now, these were collections of the songs of the popular ballads which had circulated in the 17th century. But you also had a number of prose lives of Robin Hood as well. So he appears in several histories of the highwaymen, which were published throughout the 18th century. I've put a picture of Captain Alexander Smith's kind of original, quote unquote, history of the highwaymen on the board. And Robin Hood comes off as a bit of a bad guy in this one. A bit of a brute, if you were, if you like. And it should stress that it was rare for any portrayal of Robin Hood in for most of the 18th century to be historicized. There's very little sense that we were dealing with a medieval outlaw. In fact, just to go back to the Lives of the Highwaymen book here, no dates are incorporated in those Lives of the Highwaymen. So Robin Hood, in a book such as The History of the Highwayman, could easily be just a normal 18th century robber. He's not medieval really at this point. And even if we look at William Blake's image, which is on the screen here, of Robin Hood and Clorinda, I mean, this is an 18th century gentleman we're dealing with here. This is not something medieval as such. And I've just put on the screen there that Robin Hood there, he appears kind of a rustic Mr. Darcy, obviously from Jane Austen's novel Pride and Prejudice, but not very medieval. Of course, there is an exception to the rule, I should say. In 1765, Thomas Percy's Relics of Ancient English Poetry did recast some of the old tales of Robin Hood as historical curiosities. So some context was added to the ballads in that publication. But let's get on to Robert Southey. So he was born in 1774 and educated at Westminster Public School. He was also expelled from Balliol College, Oxford, for writing a pamphlet against corporal punishment. I think personally, and one of the points Mark and I have raised in the critical introduction to the volume which we submitted to the publisher, the transcription of this, is that I think he has had a bit of a subtle effect on English popular culture, even if Southey's name isn't really known by many people today, because he was responsible for bringing the figure of the first vampire into English popular culture in his poem Falaba. He was also a medieval history enthusiast, and while he was at Oxford, he became a revolutionary, and he also drew upon the medieval period when he was young in 1794 to write a poem about Wat Tyler, who was the leader of the Peasants' Revolt. But then later in life, as people usually do, I guess, they switched to conservatism. And perhaps, obviously, I did want to bring this point out because I am talking to Brazilian colleagues here as well, but he was very conscious, especially in the later part of his career. He wanted to earn a place in Brazilian people's hearts and minds, and he wanted to gain a reputation as the region's first English language historian. And so he published in English the history of Brazil in 3 volumes in 1810, 1817, and 1819. And I think it may have had some effect, or he may have gained his intention somewhat, because as you can see on there, in 1961, the Federated Republic of Brazil actually paid for the restoration of Southey's tomb in Cumbria. So, and I have stuck a citation there at the bottom to a colleague's article on this, actually, Rebecca Nesvet, who wrote about Southey's works on the early history of Latin America. But on to Harold then. So Harold, it was written when Southey was 16 years old, and the basic plot, but I don't want to give too much away, as all being well, the volume will be published hopefully next year. But the basic plot is that a crusader named Harold returns to England, and he finds out that his father has been killed, his ancestral castle lays in ruins, his brother has been outlawed, and his sister has been carried off by an evil baron. So we're in typical, I suppose, Gothic 18th century novel territory here. So Harold then teams up with King Richard, who has returned to England from the Crusades in disguise, and Robin Hood the Outlaw to win back his ancestral lands from an evil baron. Now, Harold, the manuscript itself, is currently housed in the Western Library, Oxford, and was purchased from the Bristol-based booksellers William George's Sons in February 1895, but its provenance before this date is difficult to ascertain. The manuscript itself is 150 leaves with text on both sides and encased in what appears to be a mid-19th century binding. The main issue with the manuscript, and this is an issue which when me and Mark were transcribing it, we came across quite frequently, is that the actual leaves, they were never originally bound together. So the binding is a later addition to the manuscript. So while binding the manuscript later has the advantage of keeping the whole text together, it does mean that so on the margins especially, some words have been obscured somewhat, and the binding has been a little bit too close, perhaps. So this has meant that sometimes me and Mark, we were playing a little bit of a guessing game, although thankfully we also discovered a bit later in the transcription process that someone had also made a copy in the early 20th century, a Baroness Paravicini. So that was a great boon to the research process, as you can probably imagine. I mean, obviously it was written when Southey was 16, so it's very juvenile. So when the volume is eventually published, we're not dealing with it's not going to be a polished piece of literature by any means. I mean, I don't want to give anything more away about the plot as such. As I say, the book, all being well, should be out soon. And Mark and I are very clear in the introduction to the book that we're first going to present the novel to the scholarly community, so to speak, in order to facilitate discussion on its plot, and hopefully other scholars will take that up, and not just Mark and myself. And so the main discussion of this is really to perhaps reveal a bit about what young Southey was reading, because the manuscript itself, or the novel itself, has even by the Robert Southey scholarly community, and a society for him does exist, but it's not even been studied by them to a great degree. So in the last biography of Robert Southey, which was published in the early 2000s by Professor Speck, there is, I think, about 2 paragraphs devoted to this novel. And I think before that there was a passing remark in an article by Jean Raymond in 1978. And so I think that if we discuss some of the sources and influences which Southey used to create his own vision of the medieval past, then we can perhaps find out a bit more about Southey's life as well, especially as a kid, and the stuff he was reading. Now, Southey was raised by his aunt, Miss Tyler, who actually claimed descent from Wat Tyler, the leader of the Peasants' Revolt. So that's perhaps where he gets the enthusiasm for the medieval era from. And she was responsible for introducing him to poetry and drama at an early age, with a particular focus upon the works of William Shakespeare and Beaumont and Fletcher. And at some point in his early life, one of the poets and playwrights Southey must have become acquainted with was Ben Jonson's pastoral play entitled The Sad Shepherd, or A Tale of Robin Hood. Although the play was left unfinished by Jonson, it appeared in the second folio of his works, which were published posthumously in 1641. The play tells the story of Robin Hood, who invites all of the shepherds and shepherdesses to a feast in the Vale of Belvoir. Yet one among their number, Eglamour, is sad because he fears his true love has drowned in the river. Eglamour is the sad shepherd. A character bearing the name Eglamour also appears in Southey's novel, and is likewise of a melancholy disposition, as a quote from Robin Hood in Southey's text tells us. Eglamour has always been melancholy, said Robin Hood, since he entered into our society. Unfortunate perhaps in his love, if so I pity him, for I well know what it is to love, and my present happiness, contrasted with past misfortunes, seems 10 times greater. And Southey's novel, of course, in parts also draws heavily upon pastoral imagery, with the outlaw's bower depicted as a place of bliss that is free from anxiety. And Southey composed quite a lot of original poetry in this novel as well. And I've just included a very short excerpt from one here, which illustrates that very pastoral tone to the novel. So, how happily dwell we in the wood and over the flowery field. How happy live we in the wood beneath the sway of Robin Hood. The deer with spreading antlers crowned stalks stately over bower. And in the novel, after marries Robin and goes to live with him in his bower, he tells her that this is the life we lead. You have exchanged pomp and pageantry for the wild and uncultivated pleasures of simple nature. I mean, Southey could have consulted a copy of Jonson's second folio, although editions of early modern playwrights' works were scarce by the 18th century. Although I think it was probably more likely that Southey was acquainted with either the 6-volume edition of the works of Ben Jonson, published in 1716 by Jacob Tonson, a very well-known 18th century publisher. Or alternatively, a few years, oh well, I guess more than a few years actually, but I'll say shortly before Southey was writing his novel, in 1783, a new critical edition of Ben Jonson's Sad Shepherd appeared, along with a continuation of the unfinished play. Now, just to refresh people's memory, I said earlier that Robin Hood songs and ballads were mainly circulated via printed collections of the songs. But it is surprising how in Southey's novel, that very few what we would call traditional Robin Hood stories appear in it. And the only ballad story that is incorporated into Southey's narrative is Robin Hood and the Bishop of Hereford. I've just illustrated, if you can see the colour image there, I've illustrated this with a later 19th century image. And it's a song which perhaps dates from the 17th century, and it tells the story of an aforementioned bishop who the outlaws rob of all his gold before and force him to say mass for the outlaws. But I think, instead of drawing upon the ballads here, I think Southey was drawing perhaps upon criminal biographies and the history of the highwaymen. And this is because in one passage in particular, Southey includes a mock trial for the outlaws in front of the tied up bishop. So I've included a quotation on the board here. So Robin says, "And I, for my part," said Robin Hood, "I confess that once in the winter season, when the road was very wet, having laid a rope under the water near a slight pond which the right reverend father, before whom we now stand, was obliged to pass through, I feloniously, traitorously, and with evil intent, by which wicked manoeuvre the holy man was thrown into the water. Not contented with this, I likewise was wicked, cruel, and barbarous enough to despoil him of all his money and his horse." And this language mirrors the kind of, Southey makes an ironic use of it here, but it mirrors the language that appeared not only in the histories of the highwaymen, but also publications such as the Newgate Calendar, which were collections of trials of criminals, which were very popular in the 18th century. Now, one interesting fact about Southey's Harold is the fact that it gives researchers a glimpse into the type of writer which Southey would eventually become, perhaps. We already discussed briefly Southey's enthusiasm for Hispanic culture earlier in the talk. But in a complete departure from earlier Robin Hood tales, I shall just backtrack there. Previous to Southey, as far as I can ascertain, there were no non-English characters, although maybe someone can correct me on that particular point. And so it's unusual because in Southey's text, we see the first non-English character. It's a character called Manuel, who hails from Portugal. And so as well as being a lifelong student of Portuguese history, of course, as we've seen, Southey was a Latin American history enthusiast as well. And so this is significant because usually I have argued in the past, and this was before I kind of found out about Southey's text, that the novel Maid Marian, the Forest Queen in 1849 was the first to include a Muslim character among the Merry Men. But it's interesting that Southey includes that as early as 1791. Now, Harold was written before Southey's radicalisation after his meeting with Samuel Taylor Coleridge in 1794, and it doesn't contain anti-government sentiments as such, and certainly not the same as would be found in his later poem Wat Tyler. But even at this early stage, however, Southey's text demonstrates not a commitment to radicalism as such, but a commitment at least to social justice, which did not dissipate even after he adopted more conservative politics later in his career. And this can be seen in Harold, in which, in typical Robin Hood fashion, of course, the outlaws steal from the rich and redistribute wealth to the poor. During one of several feasts in the forest, Little John explains to King Richard, who of course is in disguise, the outlaw's manner of living. He says, "We steal from some of the king's wealthy subjects, to whom fortune has given more money than sense. Some fat bishops and abbots who take more care of their bodies than either of their own souls or those of their flock. These are the game whom we rejoice to let blood in their," we couldn't quite make that word out, "tender parts, to open their coffers and distribute it among these poor wretches who really want." So King Richard has returned to England in disguise to mingle with the outlaws, and this is a plot that is included in, perhaps because of Southey's familiarity, maybe with Thomas Percy's Reliques of Ancient English Poetry, in which many stories of monarchs venturing into the forest in disguise are contained. And of course, just another nod to the brilliant work of my co-editor, Mark, who wrote a monograph on that very subject about tales of kings venturing into the forest. Now, the king's visibly impressed with this explanation. And later, having seen the outlaws' just treatment of the poor, King Richard exclaims, "For God, were there such a band of outlaws in every forest in England, we should not have many poor." Now, every class in society is represented in Southey's Sherwood Forest. There is the monarch, underneath him, the aristocracy, represented through Maid Marian, and the middle classes are represented in the yeoman, Robin Hood, and of course there are the common forest folk. Southey's vision is one of an idealized society, therefore, which perhaps links to what we earlier noted about the pastoral. And it's one in which all classes come together and care for each other, and one in which food, of course, is plentiful. Southey would actually take these ideas forward in 1794, just 3 years after he wrote Harold, and when he'd become a confirmed proponent of the French revolutionary ideology, along with Coleridge and George Burnet, when they devised the Pantisocracy scheme. So for those who don't know, the Pantisocracy scheme was an intended project where Southey, Coleridge and George Burnet and their youthful ladyloves were going to all emigrate to America and live in a deserted part of it, and there would be no law except that everyone was equal. It is a very naive, perhaps, utopian vision they had. But again, perhaps we can see some of this in its early stages here. He's not quite a revolutionary, but he does have a vision of how society should be run. Now, I mean, I contend that Southey's unpublished novel is ultimately, or will ultimately be when it is published, an important source text, not only for Robin Hood scholars, but also for those working in the more general fields of medievalism and juvenilia studies, which is the study of what authors wrote when they were young. The novel provides a fascinating glimpse into the sources into which this young aspiring writer had to read to fashion his own medieval getting tongue-tied, sorry, to fashion his vision of the medieval past. Surprisingly, in Southey's novel, Robin Hood is not depicted as the Earl of Huntingdon, at least at the beginning, but as a simple yeoman, which harks back to early modern sources such as the Sloane biography of Robin Hood, which is an early a late 16th century source. In fact, many of Southey's sources are early modern in origin and draw upon the works of prose writers such as Ben Jonson, playwrights and prose writers such as Ben Jonson, and of course later 18th century criminal biographers. And again, the novel shows that even before he adopted a pro-revolution ideology after his meeting with Coleridge, young Southey was aware of social issues. But while Southey's novel looks backward to previously published sources, I think, or in my opinion, it also looks forward to subsequent sources and anticipates a future Robin Hood novel. One of the most interesting aspects of Southey's novel which came to light were its similarities to Walter Scott's Ivanhoe, which of course would not be published until 1819. Now in Ivanhoe, we meet a character, a crusader, who has recently returned to England, longing to see his father Cedric, from whom he has been estranged. And in Harold has likewise returned from the Crusades and is travelling home from the forest to see his estranged father. In Ivanhoe, King Richard I has returned to England in disguise, much like he does in Harold. In Scott's novel, the King and Robin Hood do not reveal their true identities to one another until the end of the novel, which is also what occurs in Southey's text. In Scott's story, one of the principal characters is Athelstane, a descendant of the older pre-Norman conquest Saxon kings, and a character bearing the same name also appears in Southey's text, as does an Ulfrida, which bears some similarity to Scott's Ulrica. Now, while no documentary evidence exists to say that Scott and Southey ever spoke about Robin Hood or this manuscript, I think we can perhaps make a tentative suggestion that these two good friends, for good friends they were, we know that for a fact, did at least exchange ideas on the subject. Thank you for listening.
Okay. Thank you very much for this enlightening paper. And thank you in the name of our group here, Linhas, for joining us in this call. It's a pleasure to have you joining from, well, over the ocean. Well, then let's move on to the Q&A. So if you are in the call here, type in the private chat here, I have a question, and then I will give you permission to speak in order of, well, in the order of the methods. If you are on YouTube, please type your question, and then I will maximize it in the screen and read it so Stephen can answer those as well. And, well, please go on, type your questions, or just say you have a question. Okay, it seems no one has a question yet. Okay, yeah, Alan Wright, do you want to? Hi,
Alan. Hey, Stephen. Been a big fan of yours since your book on Wat Tyler.
Thank you.
Which people can get.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, please. Yeah, I was just going to say I did give a little nod to Wat Tyler, as you saw. So I thought I'd stick him in somewhere.
And also your books on Robin Hood and the Highwaymen and such. All heroes and villains of the British Empire, which I have yet to read, but that last one. But anyway, I'm actually interested in Manuel. Now, you said he's Portuguese. Is he a Portuguese Muslim, or is it just the foreign-born aspect?
It's his religion is not stated, actually. And here's where I wish I had Mark with me, actually, because I would have to recheck the manuscript, but obviously the novel was written when Southey was 16, so some characters just abruptly disappear, but then they change names as well. So Manuel appears right up until I think about the middle of the book, and then suddenly he just disappears. So yeah, and comes, but then another character comes in, and his name is changed, and he is revealed to be a prince of some Middle Eastern country. So yeah, it's interesting. So I guess it's because there's no plan to the novel as such. Southey, it appears as if Southey just wrote and wrote and wrote, and so I think this is probably where his immaturity, or not immaturity, but his youthfulness as a writer comes in the fact that certain characters are just disregarded throughout the novel. But yeah, I mean, I mean, even though he doesn't do much with Manuel, I find it interesting that he is including non-English characters just for its own sake, because previously, you know, all of the Robin Hood sources, which I'm presuming Southey was familiar with, did not include non-English source characters. So yeah, it's quite an encouraging kind of internationalist outlook, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I was trying to mess around with the layout, see if I could put Stephen big and both of us small, and I couldn't, so I will leave it like that. Well, thank you, Alan. Is that all? You have another question?
Yeah, that's all. I see that Alex has a question.
Okay. So now we have a question from YouTube chat first. Here we go. Can you talk a little bit more about this lack of historicization in the 18th century Robin Hood?
Mm-hmm. I mean, the lack of historicization, this is really a symptom of the fact that, well, I mean, I should say, authors did not care for historical accuracy in those History of the Highwaymen, especially. So you, it will just say, for example, Alexander Smith's History of the Highwaymen. Robin has a meeting with the king, but it's just the king. We're not told which king it is, for example. And also, a lot of the time, especially since the, I would say the late 17th century, the time frame for Robin Hood had moved about a bit as well. So it didn't really matter. These, I guess the culture nowadays, and I guess this would be the easiest way to explain it, but if I was to write a novel featuring Robin Hood nowadays, I would have a clear idea of when I would need to set it. So I know that I need Richard I. It needs to be set some point perhaps between 1190 and 1215. I need to describe the medieval costume in great detail, so to speak. It really wasn't like that for popular history writers, and that's a kind of scare quotes around the history there. So it was just a different culture. Robin Hood, I guess, had to be translatable to people in the 18th century. It's the historicization, I would say, really comes about with perhaps Walter Scott in Ivanhoe, when that's published in 1819, which is a thoroughly well-researched novel. I mean, it's a novel with footnotes directing us to primary sources, for instance. But before that, it was a bit of a free-for-all. I think you're on mute, actually.
Well, I think I'm being asked to speak. Okay. Steve, thanks so much, and Louise, thanks for setting this up. Steve, yeah, really love the talk. Could you maybe speak? I know there's a bit of verse in the novel, and maybe could you speak about how he incorporates the verse? Is there a plan? Is it simply haphazard? Is the verse maybe something you think that Peacock picked up on at some point? I have no idea if Peacock and Southey were acquaintances, but that's just where my sort of brain is going at the moment.
Yeah. So the verse, it's usually incorporated in the novel. It's not just random, I should say, but it's usually when the minstrel of the Merry Men decides, oh, actually, we need a song to sing, so to speak. So they're having a feast, and they're having a feast. So the quotation I showed on the screen in the talk, how happy live we in the woods. So that's what the minstrel of the gang decides to sing after the wedding of Robin Hood and Maid Marian. So it's not because some I know some authors in the 19th century, so kind of Pierce Egan the Younger, who wrote Robin Hood in 1838. I mean, he just sticks poems randomly in certain places, and they're often quotations from Shakespeare, but they don't really have a lot to do with the actual plot as such. But no, these are actually worked into the plot, and usually sung by one of the minstrel characters, so to speak. So perhaps that's his. Actually, yes. I mean, I said in the talk that the kind of ballad singing aspect isn't there, perhaps. But actually, thinking about now you've asked that question, I guess that was maybe Southey's way of perhaps giving a nod to the tradition of ballad singing. Actually, yeah. But yeah, not. They do serve a purpose, and sometimes it gives us a bit of just thinking further now. Actually reveals a bit of the plot as well. So we get Richard I's backstory because the minstrel sings about his days in the Crusades in Jerusalem, for example. So yeah, they actually come to. I mean, yeah, maybe I was a bit unfair in the talk on Southey's text. Actually, I mean, I said it was a bit immature and naive, but actually that question you've just made me think a bit more carefully about that. It's quite a clever way that Southey incorporated that, actually. Yeah, I'll have to remember that.
Okay, and I just made a fool of myself because I was muted and talking quite a while ago. So yeah, sorry everyone. This is the first time using this software, so yeah, mistakes happen. Is that okay, Alex? Any other questions?
No, that was wonderful. Thanks so much, Steve.
Okay. So, does anyone has any other questions? Please type in the chat on either YouTube or here. And meanwhile, I don't know a lot about Robin Hood. In fact, I know very little. I never read. I mean, I've read one Robin Hood novel. I don't know which. And I've watched like a couple movies. So I have a kind of a noob question here. But how did you come to that novel? I mean, what was the background for you to publishing that book?
Oh, how did I find out about Southey's text? It was actually
how was the process of that, and how did it work?
So I found out about it in the final year of the last few final months of my PhD, and it was when I was working on my book for Wat Tyler. I was reading Jean Raymond's. I think it's Jean Raymond, and I think the article was titled "Southey's Early Writings and the French Revolution." So obviously, I was reading it for Wat Tyler, and then Jean Raymond, in about 2 lines, mentioned the fact that Southey wrote a Robin Hood novel in 1791. So I was like, oh, I've never heard of this, because all of the other kind of scholarship thus far mentioned an anonymous 1819 novel called Robin Hood, A Tale of the Olden Time as the first Robin Hood novel. And in some respects it still is, I must say, because the 1819 Tale of the Olden Time is the first published Robin Hood novel. But yeah, it was only when kind of reading the Raymond's article, which I was like, well, I best look this up. So yeah, I got in touch with a few Robert Southey scholars. There's a guy called Tim Fulford, who is ever willing to help on anything Southey related, and he said it's quite a substantial text, but yeah, but it does contain, you know, it is a Robin Hood novel. So yeah, the kind of next the next step after that was, oh well, I'll go down to Bodleian and I will read it. Anyway, I got down there, and I mean, I looked at the text, but there was absolutely no way I could have done anything with this on my own, and hence my friend Mark, this is where he got involved. So yeah, it was kind of just by chance. The Southey scholars had known about this novel for ages. Robin Hood scholars hadn't, but now they do, or they will do.
That's actually very interesting. How you mean it was well known for some scholars, but the Robin Hood scholars had no idea about it. So
yeah. And Southey's not exactly niche. He's quite a big romantic figure. He's quite a big figure in romantic literature. So it was just surprising, but hey, if new things can be discovered at this stage, I guess hold out the possibility that other things can be as well, I guess.
Yeah. So we have another question in the chat, which is actually a follow-up to the first question from Carol. So I will put this on the screen right now. And I understand the need for translating the 18th century audience, but was there any specific significance to choosing to write about a medieval character? Were they aware that it was a medieval character?
I guess so. Obviously, you had the histories of the highwaymen and the Garlands, which are very kind of dehistoricized. But let me see if I can just share my screen again, and hopefully this will work. 2 seconds.
Okay, let me add your screen.
Yeah, can you see my screen again? So it's really from 1765 onwards, there is an increasing historicization where Robin Hood is more firmly becoming recast as a firmly medieval character, so to speak. But a lot of this is related to the kind of construction of an English national identity at this stage. So, I mean, even in the title, relics of ancient English poetry. Kind of nation is the nation is first and foremost in these things, whereas previously, if there were collections of ballads, it would be just a run-of-the-mill title like Old Ballads or something rather plain. But in this publication, the kind of English is made quite prominent, and it's a nationalism that's increasingly focused on the deeds of great men. So the kind of the typical nationalism, if you will. So it's really, if I stop sharing that. So this is one of the reasons why historic figures like Robin Hood become increasingly historic, so to speak, because people are they're in this mode of celebrating the nation. I hope that's answered your question.
Okay. Well, if you have any follow-up to that, just type in the YouTube comments, Carol. So we have another question now from Gail. So I will move you in.
Hey.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi. Thanks, Stephen, so much. This was thoroughly enjoyable. I have a quick question about the manuscript itself.
Mm-hmm.
Did you and Mark discover any interesting marginalia in this manuscript?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, there's no marginalia at all. There's a lot of mistakes where he's crossed out things and rewrote, but yeah, it's very much a very kind of just text, so to speak, and text of the novel. The only addition to it is in the copy, actually. So Southey's text is one long novel, but the Baroness who made a copy in, I think it was about the 1920s, she must have made it, or early 1910s maybe. She actually divided the novel into 3 volumes. So in the kind of style of what they did in the early 1800s with Scott's novels, for instance. So yeah, the full text itself, when you open the copy novel, you come to a title page, which Southey's novel didn't have, and yes, it says Harold, or the Castle of Morford, and it says Volume 1, and yeah, it's very strange. So it's like there's kind of, Southey obviously tried to perhaps historicize his own text by at least placing the identifiable King Richard in, but then the person who made the copy of Southey's text wanted to make it even more further antiquated by making it a 3-volume novel, whereas by the 1920s the 3-volume novel in English literature, at least, had gone the way of the dinosaur. I think there was a study, and I think it was about 1880 the last 3-volume novel was published, and I think even when that came out, it was viewed as a bit of a, why are you still publishing in 3 volumes? So yeah, it was kind of like a double-layered attempt at historicization from Southey's original and then the copy as well. Yeah, but it's an interesting novel. Yeah, it's bizarre as well. I will say that. Yeah, yeah. Little John even ends up in India, so it's a bit of romantic colonialism, perhaps, going on in the tale as well.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
Oh, pleasure.
Okay. So let me see. Do we have any other questions on YouTube? Nope. Neither here. So I'll leave some time for people to ask more questions. And meanwhile, I have another question that is actually for you, but it could be for every Robin Hood scholar here, because it's not about your paper anymore. It's in general, and trying to move things toward my alley, which is political medievalism. Not sure any of you watch that, but it will be on our YouTube channel soon. So here's a shameless self-promotion, which is our talk with Stephanie Matabang. And she talked about how Robin Hood is used as a political symbol in the Philippines nowadays, with President Rodrigo Duterte representing himself as modern-day Robin Hood. And some kind of medievalism populism. And my question is, you've mentioned relationship between Robin Hood and British nationalism. How does the tradition of Robin Hood goes politically, as a political symbol?
I mean,
okay, let's cut like UK.
I will start off, but I know a few of the other kind of Robin Hood scholars will probably want to jump in on this as well and add to what I say. But the first political or overt, I will say overtly political text is perhaps Joseph Ritson's 1795 book, Robin Hood, a tale of all the ancient poems, songs and ballads. Now, the actual, I'm going to show off one of my collections. So yeah, now I would say perhaps this book. Now, that's overtly political by Joseph Ritson. Now, the actual collection of songs that he includes are very material. I mean, most of them, with the exception of a few of the early medieval poems, hadn't been were in circulation, apart from the Jester of Robin Hood and Potter and that. But the most important part of Ritson's novel is the biography of Robin Hood he writes at the to go in the beginning of the book, and he essentially makes Robin Hood out to be a medieval revolutionary, because Ritson was a huge supporter of the French Revolution. So I would say he's fit well with Robin Hood has fit very well with the kind of radical, I will say left wing, although I don't think in the 1790s our categorizations are easily translatable, but I would say for kind of left wing patriotism, and political use, that was probably the first use of him in that setting. But I'm sure many other people or Robin Hood scholars could probably give a few more examples of a kind of political uses of Robin Hood.
Okay, if someone else in the channel here wants to add their opinion about this or give another answer, just say in the chat and I will give you the word. I guess Alan. Let me put an Alan.
Hey again. Yeah, I mean, there are of course a lot of politicians as well who associate themselves with Robin Hood. I'll get the name wrong. Is it Jörg Haider in Austria back like 15, 20 years ago from the right wing, dressed himself up as Robin Hood and represented as that. And then in Toronto, many years ago, there was a local, very sort of fringe candidate, Tucker Gomberg, who used to dress up in a Robin Hood costume and go with toy bows and arrows and point them at banks and things. And he was like a worm harvester in his daily life. Is a sort of the famous fringe candidate for mayor. But I always find like Robin Hood, a lot of times it has sort of a mixed thing of some of the things it says are left wing and some of the things it says are right wing, because it has that strata of, left wing writers and then right wing writers and people later on borrowing elements from the different traditions and not fully sort of reconciling that. Like in Prince of Thieves, where nobility isn't a birthright, yet the noble Robin talks to the peasants in his band like they're idiots. Or, the all races are equal, except like the very American, like Morgan Freeman, isn't equal and just. And then all the Arabs that you see at the beginning, that are much more the kind of, hated, cliched ones. Or Robin is left-wing charity, but also right-wing tax fighter at the same time. So it's always interesting that kind of push and pull of the politics in the Robin Hood legend. That's all I want to add.
Oh, that's actually great, because the whole thing with in the Philippines, and I do suggest you watch that video when it comes out, because it's really interesting how Robin Hood has been appropriated and how Duterte uses this to kind of push this idea of being at the same time a hero of the people, but at the same time a vigilante, and it's kind of used as a justification for kill squads as well. So that's an interesting perspective. Alex.
Thanks. Just to piggyback off of Alan there, brings up a really good point. He's really become a malleable plastic figure in the political landscape. A few years back, I looked at political memes surrounding the 2016 election in the States here, and I really focused on far-right Republican memes of Robin Hood, and they all embraced either Hillary Rodham Clinton, who was running, or Barack Obama, who was not running, and depicted them in wholly negative lights. The Obama ones were of course racist in their depiction of Robin Hood. He is robbing the hood, or she is Hillary Rodham robbing Hood Clinton. The Clinton ones they're all misogynist too, and ageist as well. So they see Robin Hood as a wholly negative figure. These far right Republican ads, not this happy-go-lucky woodland fellow who's stealing from the rich and redistributing the wealth. He's a criminal. Obama's a criminal dressed up as Robin Hood. Hillary Clinton is a criminal who's coming for you and your wealth, and she's on the side of the banks and on Wall Street. It's rather fascinating. And then, of course, in that whole political cycle in 2016, you also had the Bernie Sanders group. And there were many political memes featuring Bernie as a Robin Hood type figure as well. So yeah, there's that. And that essay will be coming out, shameless plug, in Studies of Medievalism 30, I think it is, sometime next year. Yeah.
Oh, so
I know.
Alan?
I was going to say, I know Steve and I both tweeted at Bernie Sanders and Ted Cruz during one of the debates where they were bringing up Bernie Sanders as a Robin Hood in one of these CNN town halls. And Ted Cruz claimed, you don't know the Robin Hood legend because the beginnings of the Robin Hood legend, not like some versions, but the early Robin Hood legend was about him fighting taxes. And therefore, Ted Cruz represents Robin Hood. And I know Steve and I both said, well, not in the early ones, he doesn't.
Just to kind of piggyback off both of your points there, though, it is interesting that kind of in the 19th century, obviously you had the famous Victorian satirical magazine Punch. The first time they used Robin Hood to mock a politician was to mock Abraham Lincoln, which is interesting because I have seen many more, and this may be kind of a response to this, may be that I'm just friends with many American Robin Hood people, but I have seen many more Robin Hood appropriations for American political culture than I have in modern British political culture. So the last one I saw here was David Cameron, the former Prime Minister, as Robin Hood, but you don't regularly see them, I must say. Maybe someone who's listening, they might correct me on that, but it doesn't tend to be a legend appropriated that often in UK political culture, I must say. So it's interesting that it's often American, in my view. Yeah.
Steve, why do you think that is? Do you think he's a national treasure and nobody should mess with him? Is there something to that?
So I might sound overly cynical here, but I think he is now more of an American hero than a British one. So, I mean, you have kind of Sherwood Forest and its neighbouring village of Edwinstowe, and you've got Sherwood Forest next to it, obviously. But I mean, yeah, understandably, they make a big deal about Robin Hood, and there's even a statue in Nottingham, kind of down the road, to Robin Hood. But apart from that, I mean, it's kind of just, most people think he wasn't real, and I think because so many American films have been made about Robin Hood, people just kind of, he's a denationalized figure, or at most an American, or he's not an English figure anymore as such, and he is perhaps thoroughly American. That's what I would say. But again, I mean, maybe the residents of Nottingham would disagree with me there. But yeah, I mean, it's I must say it's interesting that it's usually Americans who kind of appropriate this Robin Hood legend.
That's actually really interesting, and it makes me think about what we were talking yesterday on how political medievalism, the way we're seeing it today, seems to be the Middle Ages according to the USA, and how it seems to be like the Trump election has influenced political medievalism folders in Europe, and we can see that, like, there are papers about that, how Marine Le Pen has used, how not herself, but the same memes about medieval Trump were then reutilized in France. So it could be a bit linked to that as well, because I think the US is this kind of Western media center. So everything they do related to Robin Hood gets automatically more attention. So could be that. Those are just my 2 cents in this discussion. I know nothing about. But yeah, thank you again, Stephen. Do we have any final questions for a final round of comments or questions, considerations, points, whatever? If so, leave them in the chat, please. Okay. I think that's a no. So, do any of you guys here want to add something else as well? Alex?
I was going to say that one of the early of the latest of sort of my generation of Robin Hood scholars, the late Julian Wasserman, I remember him probably about 20 years ago saying that Robin Hood was now thoroughly American. So in his mind, that was very much an American legend at that point, and still is. Even like the 50s TV show, which was at least the first 3 years of it were largely written by blacklisted American writers who put in the American politics.
I mean, it would be interesting, and kind of this is very speculative at this point, but it would be interesting for someone to do a study solely on the 20th century and see if was it American movies which maybe rejuvenated interest in Robin Hood. I mean, I study kind of a lot of the Robin Hood novels which come out, but especially as you get to the kind of 19th century and the growth of a truly mass literature. I mean, Robin Hood is one adventure story among many. And you are, certainly by 1880, even if you are a working class child, you can now read and write because of the Education Act. So, and the number of children's novels in the late Victorian period is countless. I don't know if there's a full bibliography of novels published in late Victorian England, but I would say the kind of portion of maybe market share, Robin Hood is certainly maybe in decline, especially in contrast to the new kind of adventure novels which are coming forward as well. And so, and it's, I mean, you get a spate of Robin Hood novels in from, say, 1870 to about 1890. And then if you look at the kind of incidence of when they're published afterwards, it gets quite further apart. And so I do wonder if it's, because it was the big Hollywood blockbusters, which actually, even in 1912, and then again, you've got the famous Errol Flynn one. They're both big budget American productions, and they're meant to dazzle you, so to speak, aren't they? If you go into the cinema and see that for the first time, you are amazed. So yeah, I would guess, I mean, again, it's a speculative point, but maybe interest in, or not interest in him, but yeah, maybe proportion of market share for Robin Hood novels among readers in the late 19th century in England is getting smaller, and it really does take perhaps that American interest to come over and, hey, we're going to make big budget movies from this. I mean, to maybe pose a counterfactual, had the 1912 and 1930s movies ever been made, would England really care about Robin Hood? Maybe to an extent, but yeah, probably interesting to the thought experiment at least.
So I'm wondering, when in British literature did the child protagonist become very large? Because thinking about Robin Hood in fiction, in modern fiction, it seems to me you have basically three sort of camps. You have the classics illustrated kind of children's novel that's basically just a collection of the ballads retold, like Howard Pyle or Roger Lancelin Green. And then you have the adult, our Robin Hood is really, really macho and tough, and he doesn't wear tights, and he doesn't live in the 12th century, and he's really, really macho kind of adult books that there's a lot of. And then the ones for younger readers are usually either focused on Marion or Robin Hood's daughter, or, I mean, both feminine and also generally younger protagonists, where Robin Hood seems to be in there. And I'm just wondering if that's something that happened in British literature before the films came out, and that might be why Robin was marginalized to an extent.
I mean, yeah, I must say, actually, I will make a confident assertion now and say that by circa 1880, Robin Hood is a figure of children's literature. Very much so. So you had kind of Scott, Thomas Love Peacock, and even Pierce Egan in the past, and they were firmly for adults. You get to the latter part of the century, it's a children's novel, and even Scott's Ivanhoe is reconfigured as a kid's novel and not one for adults, which is surprising because it was quite a serious political novel, actually, Ivanhoe. But yeah, I'd say perhaps lack of interest from adults in the 1880s is, I mean, not total lack of interest, but again, who was the big scholar in late 19th century who researched Robin Hood? It wasn't an Englishman, it was Francis J. Child, an American. Yeah, I mean, Ritson had been published back in 1795 and 1820, but it took another American to perhaps even rejuvenate that scholarly interest in it, perhaps. So, yeah, I would say very much children's, and it does take the Americans to kind of resurrect it and export it back to England, I think.
And just to add to that, the media entertainment on both sides of the pond is light entertainment, right?
Yeah.
We have the light operas, we have the pantomimes.
Yeah.
I mean, the light opera, it's light opera. It's not very. not sure who's listening, but it's not really elevated, right? It's light opera, and the pantomimes are pantomimes. So it's at a children's audience for sure. But yeah, I think Pyle's important though. If we can get back to Pyle, because that book has not been out of print since it was first published in 1883. It's certainly not as well read as it was in 1883 or up till 1950. But I think we're really looking at a children's audience here, and Pyle's book really helped that along.
No, I mean, Howard Pyle is maybe he's responsible. Maybe I put a question mark after the word responsible, but yeah, maybe it is he who really transforms Robin Hood into a figure of children's literature, and just kind of thinking through that. I mean, even the penny serialized novels of the mid-Victorian century, mid-Victorian era, they are still for adults-ish, but yeah, maybe it is Pyle who kind of really cements that. I would confidently say that, actually. Yeah.
Okay. We seem to have no more questions or comments. So I guess it's a good time to finish. We are already over an hour. So
wow.
1 hour 16. So Stefan, do you have any final notes, considerations, or conclusions?
No, just for everyone to just remember that Harold certainly is not all my own work, and a lot of it is for my brilliant co-editor Mark Truesdale as well. And you will all be able to read the book for yourselves very soon. Fingers crossed. Yeah. So as long as there's no major hiccups. So thank you all for listening.
Okay. So thank you very, very much for joining us, and I would like to thank you personally and in the name of our study group here, Linhas. Thank you for accepting our invitation and to presenting this marvelous talk. And yeah, that's it. If you like to do some shameless plugging, that's the moment for it.
I do have a book on Robin Hood for sale called The Life and Legend of an Outlaw, but it's quite cheap as well. So yeah, not a usual scholarly text. But no, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
Okay, so bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.